Welcome to episode 101 of the E101 Toolcast. In this episode, Scott and I speak with Marcel Ferreira, a senior product manager at Microsoft, Asif Siddiqi, a principal engineering manager at Microsoft, about dependent plugin assemblies, a feature that's been asked for probably over a decade. We deep dive into that, and it was glorious. Also need to apologize for the lack of shows lately. We had some personal commitments and a slew of scheduling conflicts. Apparently people like taking summer vacations rather than talking to Scott and I about nerdy stuff on our podcast. So hopefully this means that we are back on track to our every other week schedule. So with that, sit back and relax, and let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the E101 Toolcast. With me, your host, Daryl, always raising the bar, and Scott, all my Canvas apps race to the finished row. Scott, how's it going?
Hey, Daryl. Very good, thank you. Good to see you. It seems like a very long time, feel like...
it was an unintentional break, but I enjoyed it, yes. How are you doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hopefully people have missed us loads because, I've missed doing it. I was thinking, I really miss doing that. We need to do it more. But yeah, I didn't take up your offer to talk about the thing that you were just referring to, the racing game. I just thought it must be a British thing, but I don't want to talk about stuff that I've been doing. It's much more interesting. This episode is so exciting because it's kind of going back to our roots, right, Daryl?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Developer
plugin. Yeah, exactly. So I'm really looking forward to this.
So our guest today, we have Marcel Ferreira, which Marcel, if you haven't met him, he's the most probably voted most to be a Queen lookalike of anybody I've met at Microsoft. So if he was going to be in the Queen, the band, not the Queen, the ruler, but Queen, the band, like his hair, like Marcel, like it's like, wow, that's amazing. And as I'm 40 next year, so I'm starting to lose it. So I'm already becoming jealous. So we have Marcel, and then we also have Asif Siddiqi. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so help pronounce it for me. Okay.
Siddiqi.
All right, Siddiqi, and we've never met before, but you have come recommended to talk about our subject today, which is dependent assembly plugins. So this is like a big feature, like it's been asked for like a decade, right? Of hey, we want to be able to do this, and it's been live for almost a year now, I believe. Am I wrong? And so we finally got around to talking about it. So welcome to the show, guys. How you guys doing?
Yeah, thank you.
Very well, glad to be here. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned Brian May is an inspiration for the hair. So, spot on.
Excellent. Brian May. I was going to ask, how many times does that happen? But there we go. So,
Indeed.
Cool.
So we've dealt with so we have about half the show is probably pretty hardcore dev. The other half are probably managers that like our non-dev content, and then they maybe zone out for the dev portion. So we'll see if we can rein in both for this portion here. So, but at the core of what we deal with as Dataverse developers on the server side is we have to upload a plugin and plug in some compiled code. And if it depends on anything that's not already on the server, we can't really do it outside of some unsupported methodologies or kicking it off to some other service and being outside of our 2-minute pipeline, being outside of the transaction, which could be positive, could be negative, depends on what we think of. So this feature allows us to be able to do this. So why don't you guys go ahead and give a short description of what this feature is and how it got started.
Yeah, I guess I can start. So as you said, it's been something that's been asked for over a decade. I joined the team halfway in this timeline, and since my joining of the team, I've been hearing this. This is everybody asked for this, and for good reason, because as more and more developers write more and more complex code. And you're depending on all of these different components that are already available as other libraries, you are not able to use it because you can only upload a single DLL. Of course, the reason why, there are a number of reasons why it probably took so long for us to get to it. And a lot of is to deal with the complexity of loading these dependencies and dealing with different versions of it, right? So because all of these plugins are running behind the scenes, in their own context, but you're also running different plugins, potentially with different versions of the same DLL that they depend on. So think about, JSON.NET, like a common library that would be loaded by multiple plugins. We need to make sure that each plugin that are dependent on are not kind of stepping on each other. So I think there are a lot of complexities with it, and of course, updating all the relevant tooling and the pipeline and everything. So yeah, it took us long to get to it, but I think with some of the advances in the framework itself, how it changed the number of features in how assemblies are loaded, I think that definitely helped a bit. So yeah, essentially what we went to is basically supporting not just registering a single DLL, but registering a NuGet package. So for a number of reasons, we ended up choosing NuGet as the format, given the popularity and built-in support within Visual Studio, etc. So we basically decided that we're going to go with a packaging format that's NuGet. Even though we did, one thing to understand that this is a self-contained NuGet package, so we don't want to have to resolve dependencies at runtime when you're starting to run the plugin. So the model is that you have a self-contained NuGet package that has all the dependencies packed in it. And now, the same way you would register a DLL, you can register the NuGet package.
Okay.
There's some nuances to it, but essentially that's at a high level. That's what the feature is.
It's funny because there was a question that actually on one of the open source projects that I work on, which just come up in the forums actually, because the elephant in the room in these kind of scenarios is always ILMerge, right? So we can't have this episode without talking about IL, because it would just be wrong in every level. I mean, full disclosure, I was the one who wrote that blog back in whatever it was in the day saying, don't do this because Microsoft say don't do it. I mean, literally, that was my only rationale for not doing it. And everyone was like, oh, okay, Scott. All right, then we won't do it then. And then they kept on doing it. But so someone actually put on one of the GitHub, it was like a pull request for like adding support for the NuGet dependent assemblies packages, and someone piped up saying, so why should we do this then? Why isn't what's the benefit over ILMerge? So I mean, and they were saying like, oh well, isn't the performance going to be better with ILMerge and stuff? Well, let's just start the conversation there. We might as well go into the deep end, right? What's your answer to that kind of question?
Yeah, that's a good comment. Just I was waiting for this to come up.
I knew you were.
And ILMerge is something that we know people use, but we never really support it. Okay, and this is something which addresses a problem that the community has, and another reason for doing this feature. But before we go ahead on that, let me just give a little bit of clarity on how we collaborate, Asif and I. Asif owns the server side, so all the plugin structure, right? And myself, I do represent the developer tools team. So on our team, we do own all the tooling that supports the developer ecosystem. And we have so many tools, as you know. But basically, the main one is TechCLI, and also PRT. So the way we collaborated is we do support PRT, will support the dependent assembly, the way of registering. So I just wanted to clarify how we collaborate, where we fit on all these features. But right. Yes, we are aware of ILMerge, and is something that we never really supported. And dependent assembly is a way of addressing this challenge of working with multiple packages, right?
So Asif is our black box that we just trust it works, and Marcel works on the part that we touch.
Yeah.
You got it.
That's it.
I'm not sure which side I prefer to work on, to be honest. Put it like that. But I mean, it's awesome that there is now this supported route. I think that's for me. This is the thing that really is so pivotal. When I saw this feature come out, it was, no longer do you have to do these things that people have been doing under the radar. It's like there is a supported route that allows people to kind of add in these assemblies, and then if something goes wrong, support are not going to go and tell you, sorry, we can't help you. And so presumably the recommendation for everyone is to stop using ILMerge today and move over to dependent assemblies. That has to be the messaging.
Is that available in all government cloud issues as well? Because I believe my current project, we're in that, and I don't think we've quite got to the right version number for that yet. Do we know where that sits?
So the server side, I think, Marcel, is there a different version of tooling that's...
No, from the tooling standpoint, we check the version on the server side, yes.
Yeah, so it should be available.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. So that's always great, because this is like one of my first long-term government projects, and I'm like, oh, what are the shiny things I can't use? This is a shiny thing I can use, which is great. And I'm also expecting we'll have lots of people listening that are like me, or I've spent 10 years ILMerging myself at trying to look Matt Barber in the eye each time when he says, "Don't do it." That's I've been getting away. So, what would be reasons that people have called in and said this isn't working, and you're like, "Oh, it's ILMerge, we're not touching that." I don't even know how it would fail, because it's always worked for me. Do we know?
With ILMerge?
Why? What would be an instance where ILMerge just doesn't work?
Well,
or it breaks?
Interesting question. So I think there are some cases that will work. We have seen that the ILMerge itself wouldn't work.
Okay.
Right. So I think
I've got 10 years of those.
but I think if you're asking the question, like if you are able to ILMerge, so ILMerge works, and now we have a DLL that presumably should work. Would that fail at runtime? I don't specifically know or at least I haven't seen a scenario where you have been able to ILMerge and then it doesn't work at runtime. So I cannot comment on any specific scenario where that would happen.
Right.
So, but I think because we're saying it's unsupported, that means, let's say that you're ILMerging something that's like Azure SDK, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you end up ILMerging multiple Azure SDKs. We can't really predict like how multiple components, when they're bringing in, and they may have conflicting versions that they are depending on. And when you're ILMerging all of them together, what is the expected behavior?
Okay.
I mean, those are the things that are unpredictable, because when you think about ILMerge, usually we're thinking, oh, I have a single dependency, I'm just adding it. But when you talk about the complexity of today's components that are always consuming different versions of things, and you're trying to kind of mush all of them together, it becomes unpredictable. On the other hand, when we're using DLL dependency, we know what those, at least the behavior is predictable and what would be supported. But other than that, once you produce an ILMerge DLL, it's just a DLL. So as long as the merge worked correctly at runtime, it would just run as a DLL.
Is that actually what's happening in that black box? I mean, that was one of the things in my mind. Like, you get this NuGet package, which has got all these DLLs in there, right? And say you've got different versions of those DLLs in different plugins. So let's say Daryl writes a plugin and he's got version 1.1 of an assembly, and he puts that in his NuGet package. And incidentally, I love the Visual Studio, that kind of the fact that NuGet package is just it's like native, right, to Visual Studio. I mean, that's what's so cool about it, right? Is that it's using a technology that's already tried and tested. So I like the fact that you picked NuGet, even though, like you said, as if there wasn't any particular need to use it, but the fact that it was a real robust way of doing it. But say I go and create a plugin and I'm using version, I don't know, 7, which has got like loads of breaking changes. what's actually happening behind the scenes when Daryl uploads his plugin and I upload my plugin, and they've got such different versions.
Yeah. So what's happening is that when at runtime the package is being loaded, the load context for each of these packages are completely different. So what we basically are conceptually saying that each package is its own context. It's encapsulated. So it doesn't matter if you're using the same exact DLL of different version, or they just happen to be same names, because you don't know, like you may name your assembly foobar and you may name your assembly foobar, and they're completely different things. So when we're loading a package, all the dependencies that are loaded are completely its own copy of it. And when Daryl loading his plugin and the assembly is loaded, they're all its own copy. So even if they are completely the same thing, they are loaded as completely different DLLs. So from the runtime perspective, this plugin will not know about Daryl's dependency, and Daryl's plugin will not know about your dependency. And they're completely isolated.
Because that was one of the things that when I first explained it to some developers, the first thing that I think sprung to their mind was like, oh, this means we can have shared assemblies, for example, and have like multiple different plugins using. And I think that I hope I explained correctly, saying that, well, no, actually it's no different really in the same sense of an ILMerge, because you're still effectively getting a copy of that assembly, albeit the same assembly. Right. But if it's using multiple different plugins, then it's still a copy. Is that that's the right explanation?
Right. And yeah, that is exactly that. And I think as you said correctly, is that, I mean, that is one of the kind of the downside of it, is to say, like, if I were to do it because I want to share the code, and at runtime I'm actually not loading two copies of the same assembly, anytime you're doing that, you're still limited by the resources that you're given. And so if you could share the same code, then you're actually, I mean, it's an advantage to be able to share it. One way to do that is if you put all your plugins that are sharing in a single package. So now, I mean, actually, you can put multiple plugin assemblies in the same package.
Yeah.
And put all the common dependencies in there. And now you're really loading that one package instead of loading those two plugins in multiple packages and loading the copy of it. So there is still a way for you to share, like if you were to share it, the same package, same dependency at runtime, you could, as long as they're part of the same package.
That's really interesting, actually. That's because that's one of these things, like Daryl. We've talked about this lots, haven't we? Over of course, different beers in different establishments over the years about, well, do you create a plugin per feature or a plugin per piece of business logic or whatever? And yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I mean, ultimately, there's lots of different factors that address how's your team structured, and probably at the end of the day, it doesn't make that much difference from a performance. But that idea of actually having a single package with all of your compiled assemblies, so they're all part of separate projects, but they can all be sort of munged into that same package. That's an idea, because if they share common assemblies, then you don't have a copy of them.
Less database usage as well, right? Yeah, because that's a question I have, right? So I've always used the early bound assemblies, and that creates a rather large plugin. You go from a plugin that's a DLL that's less than a meg to one now that's 8 meg or 9 meg potentially, if how many classes you're generating. And so I've always been concerned about, well, is that a load performance hit? Like the first time the assembly loads, this is going to take longer to load 10 megabytes from the disk rather than 1 megabyte from the disk. So is there a is there a limit to how big that NuGet package can be, and is there a performance penalty to basically load all those up that first time that a plugin out of that gets called?
So let me answer the second question. Yes, there's a performance
all right
penalty, because of course now you're loading a larger size of the binaries. one thing to point out that it is almost same as if you ILMerge it, because it's the same content now. It's in a different format, right? So if you are in the same scenario, probably the penalty is the same, because before you were putting it in the same DLL, and now it's a zipped package. It's nothing but a zipped package, right? But yes, there is a penalty if you're using a single DLL versus a NuGet package. The other question is actually a bit more interesting, because we did have a limit, right? So the limit is somewhat, it's not like there's a very strict engineering reason for this limit to be just this. It is just a limit that was picked. Actually, if you go through it today, because of some of the re-architecting of the backend, you can actually register and use the larger package compared to what the limit used to be.
Okay.
And I think this is something that as we go through the GA date, this is something that we will update and publish. What is our limit? Like, we still want to limit in terms of, like, even though, like, architecturally today we stream all the binaries, so it's not something that's a technical limit. It's something that, because you're taking space in the database, as well as because of the penalty when you're loading, we want to make sure that there's a reasonable limit. This is something that we're still actually trying to close on before the GA date, and will be documented. The limit is going to be, it is actually higher than what was for DLL. So, but I won't speak to the exact number, because we still need to close on it.
All right.
There'll be a number, but we don't know what it'll be, but we know there'll be a number.
Yeah.
Scott's going to do the old, like, CD tech where, like, you always had to put in all the data on the CD. So he's going to put, like, Microsoft Bob into his plugins and then upload them. That's what he's going to do.
Well,
I can see it happen.
I mean, the performance impact is an interesting one, because there's obviously the initial load, but I'm never really sure how much subsequent load times are going to be, because you've got different servers that you're going to potentially run your plugins, because obviously it's going to be cached and stuff like that. So, I mean, how much performance impact are we talking about here? I mean, are we talking if you have a very, very large plugin, then you're going to quite often see a potential slowdown of some of your transactions? Or is it more like, well, if no one's been using the system for a while and the first transaction will be slow, like, so, it's like a cold start type thing, and then from that point onwards, unless people stop using it, it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the actual real impact that it's going to have on people?
So, yeah, one thing to know that behavior is actually same as today with DLLs, and the behavior doesn't change with packages versus DLLs. And you're right. So if a plugin is not being used for some period of time, 30 minutes, actually not a single plugin, but let's say like the entire org doesn't have any execution, you will actually get the containers get deallocated. So that means the next time it starts, you will actually see some cold start time where things are getting downloaded, the container gets allocated and so on. But as you said, yes, there are a number of containers that a plugin execution is happening on. And it can be 2, depending on the execution volume, it can be, just 2 containers, it can be, 5 containers, it can be 15 containers, and so on. So depending on the execution load and the number of nodes that are loading it, so if the request ends up on a container that doesn't have it cached yet, it actually gets that cold start time. Now, I think we're talking about here the start time being 10 to 15 milliseconds at a steady state. 10, 12 milliseconds to go. It can go up to 30, 50 milliseconds. Like overall, when we spread it out, like we look at the P95 and These we are talking about overheads, of course. Like when I'm talking about the milliseconds, these are what we call plugin overheads. So, of course, the plugin execution time is dependent on what you're writing in plugin now. If you write in a plugin where you just, Microsoft Bob playing in a loop, if you are processing images and things like that, it will take forever. But overhead is what the system adds to it. Like, you have to download stuff, you have to initialize and start executing and so on. So that overhead increases when a node that doesn't have a cache then has to download it. So the difference is going to be actually specifically to the size of the package. So today, let's say you have 100K DLL, and now you have a 500K package that you're using in place of that 100K DLL. That overhead, that increase is going to be just that, right? So it's not that your execution time now goes 5 times more. It's just any time you are incurring a code load, that download time is going to increase by 5 times. So it's just byte transfer time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's whatever that actual portion is of the overall loading.
Mm-hmm.
So
overall,
it's not the whole thing isn't 5 times. It's just whatever that small portion is.
Yes.
So that might be a good reason, perhaps, not to have lots and lots of plugins inside a single package, because the likelihood then is that if you have to load everything every time you use something that's got a plugin associated to it, you may only be wanting a small portion of one of those plugins, and that may not even have any use any of the dependencies at all. It may be just a standalone plugin.
The other side of it also is that if you are updating only one class within that assembly, within one of the assemblies, now you end up invalidating all of the other plugins, and they all have to re-download now because you just change one of them. Yes. So I shouldn't say other side. It's supporting what you're saying.
Right, I can stand down because I've already been just maybe moving all my plugins to a single NuGet package. Stand down, just discard that checkout now.
Don't do that quite yet, huh? Marcel, if someone's going to open up the plugin registration tool, is there anything different they need to do to be able to upload a NuGetized plugin assembly? Or is it the same experience?
You just have to have the last. Yes, it's a very similar experience. You just have to be sure you have the last version of the PRT, okay? And you can use PackCLI for that. We have a command pack2PRT, which will check your version, and it will just install if you don't have it. But basically, once you have that, the tool will check the version of the server. If it supports dependent assemblies, you just do the same way. It's a very similar way, but instead of registering a DLL, you will be registering a NuGet package, basically.
So that's good. It's cool. Yeah. And it's like a 2-step process. You upload the NuGet package in a sense, and then once you've got that, then you can register the assemblies. That's kind of what's going on behind the scenes, isn't it? It's like you're referring to a package when you actually register your assembly, your plugin assembly, right?
Correct. Our side is really simple. All the heavy work is on Asif's side. So
yeah. So I think that does. So basically, just to clarify, so as you're actually only registering the package in the new experience. So as you're saying, you don't have to really go to the second step of now I'm going to say register an assembly and referring to the package. When you register the package, the assembly and types are already there. You're going to go register package and then start registering your steps.
Steps, right? Yeah.
The assembly show up. Okay. So here's a question, like a Christmas list. Something we usually do in the show is we give our guests more work to do because we obviously paid them the money to do the first step, so that way we have a right to give more work for the second step. So what would be required in order to be able to have plugin images that always have a value even if they're null in the attributes collection. So if I register, right now my issue is if I register a plugin, a plugin image, and the value is null in the database, it isn't contained in the attributes collection of the target. And so I don't know, did the person not register the attribute to be in my pre-image, or is it null in the database? I don't know that within the plugin without having to do another call to the database. So what would be involved? How hard would it be? Can you get it done next week?
Not next week, for sure.
Not next week. Okay, all right.
Week after.
So, that's. I mean, this is actually something I was looking at. I think that the whole way of how we do pre-image and post-image probably can be better. I don't know if you guys know about there's these PowerFX plugins or low-code plugins that are coming up. So I was just looking at that as we were doing this. So maybe something that we can definitely look into, but I think what we were trying to do there is today, when you go to create a low-code plugin, of course, it's much less involved compared to when you do it in PRT. So we have, much less complexity. So we don't really have the option, say, create a pre-image, name it, create a pre-image, create a post-image, and name it, and so on. Something as we're doing the low-code plugin, we are looking into to make these pre-image and post-image definitions easier or more intuitive. So in the low-code plugin area where you're using PowerFX and you can actually refer to an attribute, we can determine what you're trying to access and automatically create the pre-image and post-image behind the scenes. And that way, when you're actually getting the value, you are actually getting the value that's there. It's not because somebody, forget to register or not specifying it. I don't know if that's going to solve your scenario. Maybe something that we can follow up on, but yeah.
The biggest issue that would solve the issue for that scenario because you're defining it, so it's going to be required by the platform to be in there. But if you're creating a third-party DLL plugin that you want to give to other people and they're required to configure it in some way or form, you don't have any control over that. So that's the big. I know it's not that big of a norm, but it is. Hey, this is a space that this would be nice to be able to go check for that. So anyway,
good
no problem. It's a great thought. It's my thought.
Yeah. I'll look into it.
So it's my turn now. So Marcel, so the Visual Studio add-in for plugin registration and plugin authoring and stuff, because obviously we've got the pack CLI, which is awesome, and I love it, how you can create your plugin projects and it just creates everything for you and everything like that. But there's this sort of little bit of a difference between the experience that you'd get in that pack CLI and in Visual Studio add-in.
Yes, that's a good question. And this is something that we solved, which is to bring consistency across the tools. Okay, so the tool you mentioned is the Visual Studio extension. I think the official name is Visual Power Platform for Visual Studio, which is the name. We just released an update for the Visual Studio 2022 version. Okay, so that is out. And there is a standard way for you to create a plugin project in this tool. And it was inconsistent if you compare Visual Studio to PRT. Okay. Now it is consistent. It should be consistent. So if you create a new project, a new PRT project in Visual Studio, it should be the same as if you are using Pack CLI or VS Code extension to use Pack plugin init. So they should be the same, both.
Nice.
Okay?
Can we have like a little bit of confetti going over as well? A little confetti ball.
Our mindset is we don't want dictate. If people want to use Visual Studio, they should use Visual Studio. If people use VS Code, they're more comfortable with VS Code, they should use VS Code. I know we have lots of things going on. We have the VS Code, we have Visual Studio, we have the new integration native with Visual Studio for custom connectors. So yes, we want to meet the developer where they are. Okay, so we will not dictate. the main thing which concerns me is consistency. So if you guys have any feedback about doesn't work in Visual Studio, but it works on PaxCLI, I would love to hear about that. We want to be consistent across all the tools. Because in the end, if you want to register the plugin, doesn't matter if you are in Visual Studio or VS Code, PRT will be driving that experience for you. Okay?
Cool.
So the more consistent and the more natural and easy that we can do, that's what we do in the tools team, in the DevTools team.
I think that's
in Microsoft.
Music to everyone's ears, I think, listening to this. So yeah, really good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. It's complex. It's complex, as you know. The team is large, but that's exactly the reason of our team. We are bringing some consistency and make some clarity. We'll get there. We are getting there.
Have we got to the point as a developer support team, or I don't know what the people that work on the product that are helping provide tools for the developers in this world? So, Marcel, your side of the fence. Have we gotten to the point where Matt Barber isn't creating fixes on the weekends? Is that part kind of done with developer tools?
You know, Matt, and
last year, I think it happened. I was like, I thought this was over with. I thought he had somebody else to do this. He's fixing this on the fly.
My favorite pastime, reading what Matt posts on the GitHub repositories and stuff. He's just awesome. He's just
it's amazing. I love working with Matt. I always learn something when I talk to him. And actually, my background, I used to be a developer on the AX side, so F&O. Matthew helped me a lot to learn about the Power Platform world. So one thing that we're doing more, if you go to our GitHub, the Power Platform Dev Tools, we do have a GitHub. We are paying attention there, and we are more active there. So every time, if you have an issue, please open issue in GitHub. Andrew is our engineer manager. He's always there, and we work very close to Matthew to be sure that our team is building the right tools, and Matt doesn't need to do the work on the weekends. So yes, but he loves it, and he has so many ideas.
I get the impression you'll never be able to stop Matt from doing that stuff.
I don't have this illusion, but I have to try.
Well, yeah, and near and dear to my heart is recently the source code for the model builder has been posted on GitHub. So now you can actually go and look at all that stuff, which is the prettiest code in the world. But hey, at least if you have, if you're like me, you're like, why isn't this working? You guys have a static cached value here. You need to make sure it's not static and clearing it. So I'm not to decompile it anymore. So that should help me my endeavors at least.
And to be honest, it's a great way of getting community feedback and help as well. Is just open, and we are really transparent. We want to share the code as much as we can in our GitHub repo.
I saw there was office hours that's just been announced as well for the tools.
That's a good point. Yes, Shafka is my PM, works on the team. He's setting some office hours. We really want to engage more with the community and really understand the real problems. For example, ILMerge is a problem that we are solving now. It's kind of overdue, we know. But we are doing our best, and community will help us to set the right priorities on the backlog that we have.
So in the show notes, we'll put a link to office hours and make sure everyone attends that. So
please, Shapka is leading that. I will be attending. Andrew will be attending as well. All the team, Pro Dev Tools will be there, and we are looking forward to connect with you guys.
Yeah, our awesome. 6 or 7 listeners will definitely be there, I'm sure. So
please.
It's like 8, 9.
8. Maybe it's 8 now. Yeah, I think.
So another wish list item. Here's an issue that's plagued me for years. You are allowed, and this could one or either you could fix this one. Either side of the fence. If you happen to make a class that's a generic class, that's a base class for plugins, and you inherit from that generic class, you can define on the base class a generic class that it implements iPlugin. And you cannot define it on the actual end class. It registers just fine, but then when you try to go run it, it blows chow saying there's no iPlugin. So the part on the server that tries to figure out what call do I call doesn't understand the generic base class to figure out that it implements iPlugin in the generic base class. So either not allowing it on the plugin side of the registration side of the fence, or fixing it on the server side of the fence, are both valid solutions here. But have you had anyone ask for that? And can you get it done next week?
Actually, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I did not know that. No, never came across my list, but
you just need to open source the backend code base, and I'll put a pull request out there.
What I would tell you it is, if it doesn't exist, I will look it up. Open a GitHub issue on that, and if we get enough votes, we'll get it done.
Yeah,
cool. All right. I mean, I always want it to be done on the server side rather than the client side. But
yeah. I mean, you can open the issue, and then but we always are, working together. So it doesn't matter what the fix is.
Asif and I, like our teams, we work very closely, and Matthew knows everything as well.
Yeah, exactly.
We will work the best way possible. Yeah.
All right. I think they just gave me homework, Scott, to go in there.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're right, Daryl. Yeah, that's what that'll teach you. Yeah,
Don't teach me to try to genericize everything.
I'll vote it up for you, though, Daryl. Don't worry.
We'll get 2 votes.
But it's funny that you mentioned that the base class there, Daryl, because it's like everyone's pet project making like the best base class you can possibly create. I mean, like Jonas does a whole session, I think, on it. He's made it a real passion thing for him, and every project has got their own base class. That some of them are kind of based on the original base class that was there on that Visual Studio extension. You remember the base class that you had? It had some. You had kind of like you registered the steps in code, and then it executed them.
Yeah, I still do that in my plugin-based stuff because of that.
I've noticed recently the plugin base class doesn't do that anymore. So there's obviously some point somebody decided that the old base class was not a good idea and we needed to go a much simpler one. Is there a story behind it? I feel as though there should be a story why someone went, what's this code in here? Let's just get rid of it. No one uses that.
I have a question for you. You guys know the community. What do you think people are using more these days? Visual Studio with our extension, vanilla Visual Studio, VS Code. In your experience, when you need to create a new plugin, what people would use?
I've got an answer, but I'm interested to hear Daryl's.
That says I want Daryl to speak first, so I don't have to go first. That's what that is. So, I would say I have a very difficult time speaking for a brand new developer, because I would think, because back in the day, my assumption is, this is Microsoft product. They have everything working from A to B. Let me go in either my Visual Studio or VS Code and go through and pick out whatever the extension is for that development environment, install it, and use that. So I would think that would be what a brand new developer would do. And along those lines, I still feel like, at least in the projects I've been on, that most developers are more comfortable in Visual Studio for C# stuff. And I'm starting to see a little bit more of a trickle of people going to VS Code for TypeScript and JavaScript type of stuff. Sometimes I'm even trying to push people in my project, hey, use VS Code for the JavaScript stuff. It's actually way more efficient and easier and whatever. I try to get them to do that, and they're still like holding on to dear life for that. That's fine. There's very rarely any issue I've ever seen besides some auto formatting that might happen in one environment than the other that causes any issue. So hooray for that. So I would say, as a brand new developer of the platform, they would probably use Visual Studio for C# stuff, and they would probably install the extension for it and try to go down that route first. As someone that has been in CRM for more than 3 years, Dataverse, the Power Platform, for more than 3 years, I would say they would be much likely to use the tools that they're comfortable with. And so they're going to be going just the out-of-the-box plugin registration tool. They don't need that, whether they know or not, they don't need that hand-holding in order to be able to get that set up and do it. So that's my answer. Scott, what's yours?
Well, I mean, I know it sounds like really suspicious, but I was going to say exactly the same thing, Daryl.
Well,
sure you were.
Well,
yeah,
no,
hand on heart. Sure,
which is great.
Sure.
It's great. To be honest, is the answer that I expect. Like, I talk with lots of folks, and it's exactly that. But I wanted to bring that up. So.
Okay,
makes sense.
All right, So if you're a listener and you're brand new to the platform and somehow you found our podcast, don't know how, but somehow you did, let Marcel know. Send me a message.
I think a lot of people are now just starting to realize the pack tools can create your plugin project. I think that is something that's just like, a recent discovery. So the people that have been using like just a standard Visual Studio project,
not only that, now you can also update assemblies.
Yeah,
you can use
plugin push. Yeah,
you cannot register, but you can update.
Yeah.
See, I've never done that before. Now I feel like I'm missing out. Like maybe my workflow is bad. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe it should get improved.
Well, but you know what you can do as well? If you use Visual Studio, you can run PRT within Visual Studio. Like you just open a terminal. That's what I do a lot when I'm doing plugins for test. I'm using PRT within Visual Studio. So there are so many options.
I have to support WinForms and use my external toolbox. So
okay.
And we all know why you did NuGet packages, because external toolbox uses NuGet package. You guys were just following suit. We understand.
Clearly.
Well, I have to pay $1 to my manager every time someone mentions XRM toolbox.
Really?
I'm kidding.
Who's your manager? Can you give me a slice of the pie here? Because
I'm kidding. It's Kartik. You might cut that out. I'm just kidding.
Is it like kind of a swear jar or something like that?
Yeah.
For all the good reasons, though, I'm sure it's like,
Well, I think we've covered everything from A to Z and everything in between. Is there anything that's coming down the pipe that the community should be aware of or looking forward to or pestering you to ask when it's done? Or is dependent assemblies a wrapped up feature and we don't have to worry about it?
Go ahead, Asif.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of things that we can think of as the, additive to dependent assembly, right? So as you said, like, how do you actually share things? We expect that a lot of people are going to be using dependencies that are very common, like Azure SDKs, JSON.NET, or, other libraries that are common. So one thing that we have been thinking about as a next version of dependent assembly is what we can call like well-known packages, right? So be able to actually refer to something that's just, you can just refer to out of the box. Going to a full-fledged, like, I register now a dependency, not just plugin, but a package that you can refer. That's a little bit farther out. I don't know when or even whether we're going to get there, because we don't want to we don't want to have like a full-fledged NuGet repository within the plugin infrastructure. I don't think that makes sense. But something that we can definitely get to is a concept of a well-known packages, and maybe even do that for an org scope where you can say, I can register my own well-known package, so to speak. We have to think through that design, but something that we are definitely thinking of as the next thing that we will be looking into. No idea about timeline, etc. yet, but something that we want to get to. The other thing I want to mention, as we talked about the download, the cold start, something that we will be also looking at in any way we can improve the caching as people start using larger packages. So we are looking at a few things to improve the caching, so we can make sure that the larger packages don't have as much impact as otherwise would.
It would be lovely if we could get some baselines of what to expect with that. Like if you have a Hello World plugin that does nothing, it just registered, runs and logs, hey, Hello World. And it's 100 kilobytes, a megabyte, 10 megabytes. Like, what sort of performance penalty we're going to have to pay? Because lots of times I get into conversations with people and like, oh, we don't want to make this big plugin. I'm like, well, what does it cost you? And no one has an answer for that as far as performance wise. so I know that maybe those metrics you can't post, but it would be really nice to have a general idea of what that would be to have an argument or be able to say, you know what, this isn't worth incurring a 100 millisecond load time just for this feature. Let's cut it out. And that probably would help you guys too, as far as decreasing the amount of IO that you're having to do on the server. Because when things are free, people are going to use all of it. And so they don't have to really see the cost to load all this stuff into memory outside of the load costs. They may abuse it more than you'd like as a platform.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's a very valid point. Something that, I think something that we can definitely, if not like, at least an idea of this is the range that you can expect. And so something that we'll try to include in the documentation.
That'd be lovely. Awesome.
Yeah. And from my side, I just would like to comment, it's not really dependent assembly related, but I would encourage people when debugging plugins to use a tracing service instead of plugin profiles. We did a few tweaks, a few improvements on PRT to make it easier for you to debug using the tracing service. I would encourage people to use that and to give feedback on this experience.
Okay. So the tracing service, so I haven't gone through and used the debugging profiler within plugin registration, PRT, in years. So back in the day, it was like throw an exception was an option, or it would log a trace and then you could like attach to the log. What is this that you're referring to for me and others like me?
Yes, I mean, I'm more referring to the fact that with plugin profile, you need to go ahead and install, and there are lots of setup, right? So if you are really using the tracing service, you can enable from PRT, and you can start to debug everything from PRT. So it's a lot easier. And when I start to learn the Power Platform coming from AX, I found the experience really not ideal. But tracing is a lot simpler and a lot easier. And I was very surprised when I saw, why people still use that? So that's kind of where it's coming from.
It's funny because Daryl and I think we're both of the same ilk in the sense that we try to make sure our tests and everything all kind of work, and and therefore when it gets deployed, the actual likelihood of things going wrong to the extent that you can't really debug it just by looking at some of the server side traces, aren't so likely.
Or taking those server-side traces and making a local test based on
making a local test out of it. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. And then, of course, you benefit from a regression test because then going forward, you make sure that nothing breaks, as you change the code. So there's probably a whole episode there, I reckon.
Okay. Yep. There you go.
So, you could all come back and we could talk about that for another.
Yes. Let's do it.
Why not?
All right. Start right now. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate you coming on. Appreciate all your work on the platform to make the lives of us developers on the other side of the Microsoft fence easier, more enjoyable, and I enjoy. I very much appreciate coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great. It's great. If anybody wants to get a hold of you guys as far as submitting bugs or just asking questions, do you guys have a place where you hang out online, or are you going to push people to use GitHub and then submit issues, or how do people get hold of you, our guests?
Okay, I can go first. So yes, GitHub is a great way. We are all there. But we also have an alias for our team, which is ppdevtools@microsoft.com. If people like old-fashioned emails, just send an email. That's how. But we are always GitHub is the place to go.
All right. Okay. All right. Steve, do you have a different answer for that?
No. I was exactly thinking the same thing.
All right.
Yeah, sure you are.
Well, Scott, that's how our listeners can get hold of our guests. How can our listeners get hold of us?
Well, Daryl, if you'd like to use good old-fashioned email, then yes, you can get hold of us on cast@xrmtoolbox.com or on social media @xrmtoolcast. And please do get in touch. And if you've enjoyed this episode or any of the other episodes, please remember to leave a review or post, let your friends know so we can get some more listeners. That'd be great.
How many likes would we need in order to get you to talk about your Canvas app racing app? How many people?
Oh, wow.
Before you succumb to peer pressure, Scott.
I want to see that.
Yeah, how many likes would I need? Yeah.
Yes. What do you need? Do you need like 15 comments on YouTube? Like, how do we do this?
I don't know.
Better set the bar high.
10,000? Is that too?
All right, Russian bots. We'll do it. All right, 10,000.
Higher. That was obviously too low if you're thinking about using bots to do it.
So I can't do it, but if one of our listeners can figure it out, we'll let that count. It's one of our listeners. So anyway,
yeah, but it's been an absolute pleasure, Asif and Marcel, and really thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed just getting back to basics and chatting about good old fashioned plugins.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you very much for having us here.
Yeah. Adios, guys. Bye. This has been the XRM Toolcast with Daryl Labar and Scott Daryl. Produced by Lynn Zawin. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to cast@xrmtoolbox.com, tweet @XRM Toolcast, or hit us up on our LinkedIn XRM Toolcast page.